Obi-Wan and Kaz landed back on the Negotiator in short order. The trip there was spent with Kaz asking him all manner of questions about Grievous's ship and the rescuing of the Senator. Kaz was a little disappointed at having missed out on all the action, but also relieved that he didn't have to try and fight his way through a mass of battle droids and General Grievous without an actual lightsaber. His master had told him that they would be proceeding to Elam the moment Obi-Wan had a chance to contact the Council and let them know they were headed to the ice planet. Master Obi-Wan, it seemed, was past asking for permission and was instead going to ask for forgiveness. When the docking ramp lowered enough for them to exit, Kaz and Obi-Wan hurried down it and into the ship bay of the Negotiator. As was becoming tradition, Cody was waiting for them at the end of the ramp, helmet off, arms crossed, a slight smile on his lips and a pleased light in his eyes. Kaz beat Obi-Wan down the ramp and was the first there to fling himself at Cody and capture the older man in a hug. "Hey, kid." Cody's arms came up and wrapped around Kaz in a practiced motion, clutching the cadet to his armor briefly before pushing the boy back by his shoulders and looking down at him. "Heard it went all right." "Did it?" "Yeah, it was nice to see Rex and Ahsoka again, even if it was only for a bit." "And I saw Wolf feed too," Kaz said, words tumbling out of his mouth one after the other. His expression gentled from his excitement as he spoke about Wolf. "He's all right, Cody. He'll be okay. Rex is taking good care of him." "I know, I got a comm message from Wolf a little bit ago," Cody said, ruffling Kaz's hair fondly. He looked up and smiled at Obi-Wan in greeting. "General, glad to have you back." "I am glad to be back, Commander," Obi-Wan answered, returning Cody's smile with ease. Motioning towards the lift, Obi-Wan continued. "I'd like to contact the Council and let them know we are heading to Elam." "There is something Kaz and I need to do." Cody smirked and turned smartly on his heel, walking with Obi-Wan and Kaz towards the elevator. "Run out of patience?" "Can't say I blame you. He needs to get a proper lightsaber." "Yes, I do," Kaz said, arms crossed and a small pout on his face. "It's starting to impact mission effectiveness." "My thoughts exactly," Obi-Wan agreed. Door hissing open, Kaz, Cody, and Obi-Wan stepped into the lift, Obi-Wan hitting the button for the bridge. The holotable there would be perfectly suitable for contacting the Council and informing them of his intentions, as well as receiving their marching orders for the next mission. Now that the Malevolence was destroyed, it would be a while before the Separatists mounted another offensive in this region. Master Luminara could handle the policing of this sector on her own until then. The 7th Sky Corps was no longer needed. "I heard you had a run-in with General Grievous," Cody spoke after a brief silence. "A very minor one, yes," Obi-Wan said mildly. He waved a hand lazily. "I crossed blades with him for one blow and then got away." Cody relaxed slightly at that and nodded. "That does sound minor." He paused, rubbing a quick hand through his hair and gave Obi-Wan a look out of the corner of his eye. "But I could feel something. I don't know, it felt like panic." "What happened?" "I was ambushed, I'm afraid." "I managed it easily." Obi-Wan smiled charmingly at Cody. The lift opened and they all stepped out, Obi-Wan continuing his statement. "Don't worry so much for me, Cody. I can handle myself." "I know that, General," Cody said, rolling his eyes with a sigh. "It's not that you can't handle yourself, it's that you throw yourself headlong into trouble." "The Force will provide, Commander," Obi-Wan answered serenely, knowing it would aggravate Cody. Cody blew out an annoyed breath. "Of course, sir." Kaz giggled quietly, but stayed out of it, deciding to enjoy the banter instead. They all gathered around the holotable and Obi-Wan immediately started the comm call, not wanting to wait any longer. The Force was urging him on, pressing on him a sense of needing to accomplish this task now, as another chance with as good timing would not present itself for a while. Obi-Wan took pity on Cody while they were waiting and clapped the other man on his left shoulder pauldron. "Take heart, Cody. You know I don't do such things unless necessary." "I know," Cody replied, corners of his lips twitching up fondly. "But I'm entitled to my worry." "Oh well, if you insist." Obi-Wan grinned at him and dropped his hand as the call connected. His face cleared, losing its fondness and morphing to all business. He straightened, crossing his arms and letting his fingers rest on his elbows. "Master Windu, hello!" "Master Kenobi," Mace greeted, tone sliding into wary. He crossed his own arms and gave Obi-Wan a stern look. "What can I do for you?" "I'm taking Kaz to Elam immediately following this transmission, Master." "I just called to inform the Council," Obi-Wan answered, voice strong and sure. Mace sighed. "Yes, I suppose that trip is long overdue. You have leave to go. Best take a shuttle, however." He turned his attention to Commander Cody before Obi-Wan could question that last statement. Commander Cody, the Senate has commissioned an inspection tour. They are assigning the battalion commanders to different sectors for this. You and Captain Rex are to head in the direction of Rishi and its accompanying systems. Rendezvous with him on Coruscant, he turned back to Kenobi. Obi-Wan, the 501st and the 212th will have 2 days of leave on Coruscant before shipping out. After you've finished on Elam, meet up with the rest of your fleet and get in touch with Skywalker. There are talks of a mission to hunt down General Grievous in the works. Obi-Wan leaned back on his right foot, left hand on his chin as he absorbed this new information. Well then, I will take a shuttle with Kaz shortly and make plans with Anakin to meet back with the fleet. Thank you, Mace. I'll contact Captain Rex, General, Cody said, snapping to attention and nodding at General Windu. Are he and I on leave as well? Unfortunately not, Commander. We need you to get started right away. You are both integral to the functioning of your battalions, and I do not want to keep you from them for longer than absolutely required, General Windu informed him, regret lightly coloring his voice. Aye. Understood, sir, Cody replied easily, not at all bothered by this news. They had not been particularly busy while patrolling the hyperspace lanes, and he did not feel like he really needed any kind of a break. Thank you, Commander, Master Kenobi. May the Force be with you. Mace Windu inclined his head in goodbye and then ended the call, not waiting for their responses. Obi-Wan and Cody shared a look and a shrug, and Obi-Wan spoke. Well, that was easier than I expected it to be. Yes, sir, Cody replied, feeling a little bit overwhelmed with everything that had just been thrown at them. When are we leaving? Kaz asked, resting his hands on the tops of his utility pouches. He looked between Obi-Wan and Cody expectantly. I would like to take a turn in the fresher and pack a bag before herring off on our next adventure, Padawan, Obi-Wan said with a laugh. Kaz nodded. But I'll head to my quarters and get packed too, Master. Meet you in the hangar bay in an hour? Yes, that sounds reasonable, Obi-Wan agreed, turning to depart the bridge. I will see you then. Obi-Wan and Kaz made for the lift in perfect sync, Cody following after them. The ride to Deck 1 did not take long, and soon they were all in the familiar hallway. Obi-Wan turned right towards his quarters, as did Kaz, and, oddly, Cody followed again. Obi-Wan sent a question down their bond and received an acknowledgement, plus a feeling from Cody of wanting to speak with him about something. Obi-Wan just looked over his shoulder and nodded at Cody, saying nothing. Kaz darted to his own quarters and slipped inside quickly. Obi-Wan opened the door to his own and walked in, Cody following close behind him and lingering near the entrance after the door hissed shut. Obi-Wan began puttering around his room, sensing that Cody needed a moment to marshal his thoughts, and fished out his travel bag, packing away the few items he would need for Elam. A few emergency rations, emergency cold gear, light source, and backup communicator. A very short list of things considering he did not plan to be planet-side more than the few hours it would take Kaz to obtain his crystal. As he placed his extra cloak into the bag, Cody spoke. How dangerous is Elam? Cody asked, clearly deciding to start with the easy topic. Not very, Obi-Wan answered, looking up from his bag. He leaned away from it, hands slipping down to hang by his sides. It's cold and there is the potential for an extended stay, but it's been several hundred years since a Jedi was injured during the gathering. Kaz will be fine. Does he have what he needs to actually build the lightsaber? Cody walked into the main part of the room, settling by Obi-Wan's desk, resting his left hip against the edge. Or do I need to get supplies for him from the temple? I ordered what he will need already in preparation, Obi-Wan replied, bending over to pull a medium-sized box of materials from his footlocker. He set it on the bed and opened the lid, revealing a plethora of small electronics pieces and some materials that looked like sword hilts. I had it delivered to the negotiator on one of our supply shuttles while we were patrolling the shipping lanes. Everything he will need is in here. Cody came over and perused the items up close. He nodded. Good. Obi-Wan closed the lid and crossed his arms over his chest, regarding Cody carefully. I sense that is not entirely what you wanted to speak with me about. No, Cody said, looking up and locking eyes with Obi-Wan. It's not. What do you wish to talk about, Cody? Cody swallowed, looking away briefly before his eyes snapped back again as if drawn to Obi-Wan's like a magnet. Are we all right? That brought Obi-Wan up short and his eyebrows bounced up in surprise. I'm sorry? You were distant all week since 79's and then all of a sudden today you weren't, Cody replied, fingers of his right hand twitching against his leg, left gesturing absently as he spoke. I don't know what to do with that. Ah, Obi-Wan winced and looked away to stare at the closed door of his fresher. My apologies, Cody. I didn't mean to do that to you. It's fine, Cody said after a moment of shifting his weight to his other foot. I just think we should settle on one or the other. It's easier to handle if things stay in a steady state. Obi-Wan sighed, arms crossing and hand coming up to smooth over his beard. He looked back to Cody. I understand that, Cody, but interpersonal relationships are not something you can easily regulate. Much less a force bond as strong as the one between you and I. Cody scowled at that. That's not really what I meant. Then what did you mean? Don't blow hot and cold on me, Cody answered after thinking it over carefully, hands starting to move more animatedly as he spoke. Just pick one. Either we're in this together or we aren't. Obi-Wan had the brief and hysterical thought that Cody was being both remarkably blunt and remarkably adult about this. He was not used to it, more accustomed to the Jedi way of oblique references, assumptions, and hints through the Force. Cody was not that way. He simply spoke his mind, stated his demands, and told Obi-Wan what he would like done about a problem. Cody, Obi-Wan thought, had an exceptional emotional bravery when it suited him to. You're right, Obi-Wan answered evenly, trying to gather his own courage. He was unused to these kinds of conversations, and it was making him highly uncomfortable. I shouldn't do that. I honestly didn't mean to make you worry. And you didn't upset me, I assure you. Thank you. Cody stepped closer, right hand reaching out and grasping at Obi-Wan's elbow like he had in the council chambers. Maybe I didn't upset you, but I'm pretty sure I unsettled you. I didn't mean to. Obi-Wan sighed and shook his head, determinedly ignoring the warmth of Cody's gloved fingers in the gaps of his armor. His first knee-jerk response was to deny what Cody had said, but he realized that would not help the situation. Yes, you're right. You're tinted, but everything's fine now. Cody's gaze was shrewd but still gentle despite that. I know it's not completely, but I respect the fact that you don't want to talk about it yet. Obi-Wan cleared his throat, fighting valiantly against his nerves. Yes, thank you. Cody just raised a doubting eyebrow at him and let go of his elbow, taking a small, deliberate step back and out of Obi-Wan's immediate personal space. You're welcome. Obi-Wan nodded and turned back to his bag, fiddling with the items inside, closing the top part way and then deciding against it, realizing he still needed to hit the fresher and grab a few things from there before he left with Kaz just in case. The hyperspace trip would be longer than the one to Tatooine, and he wanted to be as prepared as he could for it. Recognizing that he was delaying the inevitable, Obi-Wan turned back to his commander. Will you be all right on this inspection tour with Rex? Cody smiled, allowing Obi-Wan to change the subject without a fight. I think I'm looking forward to it, actually. He chuckled. I hardly get to spend time with Rex. This'll be a nice little vacation. I'm glad, Obi-Wan said, pulling away from his bag entirely and smiling genuinely at Cody. You're right. This is the perfect assignment for the two of you to spend some quality time together outside of shooting battle droids. Cody smirked. That's its own version of fun, Obi-Wan rolled his eyes. For you, maybe. I'd prefer to avoid it entirely, all things considered. You like fighting just as much as I do, Cody shot back quickly with a scoff. Our sparring sessions give you away. You're right, I do, Obi-Wan agreed easily, chagrined. He shook his head and gestured with a hand in the air. And I suppose I do enjoy slicing up droids. I just wish we didn't have to. That's fair, Cody acknowledged. He crossed his arms and stared off over Obi-Wan's shoulder. I'd like to just be shooting droids for fun and not to save my vote. He stopped, a heavy thought occurring to him. I don't know if I can wish there wasn't a war. I wouldn't even be here without it. Obi-Wan felt that thought like a knife between his ribs. Yes, that does present quite the conundrum, doesn't it? What do you think? Cody asked quietly, voice nearly a whisper. He locked eyes with Obi-Wan again. Would the galaxy be a better place without me and my vote? Obi-Wan swallowed hard and forced himself to not look away. I don't know. He felt that answer was inadequate, could feel that Cody felt the same down their bond and continued. Perhaps, maybe. Or maybe we would be at war either way. In fact, I think we would. He stopped again, drawing his courage to himself. Cody deserved nothing less than his honesty. And if we were going to be fighting either way, I would prefer it to be you at my side over all others. Cody felt his neck beneath his blacks flush, jaw dropping and eyes going round on his face. He snapped his mouth shut and carefully considered his next words as he fought the blush trying to rise to his cheeks. That means a lot to me. He blew out a harsh breath through his nose. But what do you mean you think we'd be at war either way? It has become obvious that someone or something may have engineered this conflict, Obi-Wan replied carefully. We think, as in the council, that it is Dooku's master. Of course, we have no good proof yet, other than the words of Darth Tyrannus himself and the fact that two ready-made armies seem to clash together at the exactly perfect moment. But it is certainly strong circumstantial evidence. Cody's eyebrows jumped up. I'll say. Suddenly, the color drained from his face and he reached out, snagging Obi-Wan's wrist with trembling fingers. Filler. Fett. He made a deal with Tyrannus. Grungus. Yes, he did. Obi-Wan lifted his other hand and laid his fingers over Cody's. But that deal was started by Master Sifo Dyas. He was prone to visions, so much so that it rather drove him insane and led to his death. He foresaw this, and in his attempt to stop it likely played right into the conflict unwittingly. But if we were made by the Sith then, peace, Cody. Obi-Wan's grip tightened briefly over Cody's hand. He tipped up a corner of his lips encouragingly. We have you now. Whatever it was you were intended for, it doesn't matter anymore. The Jedi will see to it that you and your Vode will have a future hell. I will myself if it comes down to it. What plans the Sith may or may not have had will not succeed. I hope you're right. Cody squeezed Obi-Wan's wrist before letting go, choosing to trust him. He looked more hopeful than he'd started, but still his mind was spinning over the problem. Obi-Wan could sense it and reached down their bond, impressing a sense of calm over Cody as much as he could. Cody's shoulders came down from their slow climb up to his ears, and Obi-Wan counted that as a victory. His commander had a rather unfortunate tendency to worry. It was sometimes difficult to get him to stop. I am, Obi-Wan answered. He clapped both hands down on his thighs and smoothed them over the rough-hewn fabric of his leggings. Well, I have somewhere to be, as do you. I look forward to hearing about your adventures with Rex when you return. Cody grinned, not at all surprised by the change of subject. Obi-Wan could only take highly charged conversations in small doses. Go, horse, and you'll have to tell me about your adventure with Kaz. I will, I promise, Obi-Wan replied, walking with Cody to the door of his quarters. The commander paused by the door and turned, giving Obi-Wan a solemn look. Keep him safe, all right? And stay safe yourself. I will as long as you do, Obi-Wan said quietly. I will. Cody nodded, gave him one last look, then keyed the door and stepped out into the hallway without a backwards glance. Obi-Wan stared at the door for a moment longer than completely necessary, then turned and set about making himself ready for a long shuttle ride to Ilum. He started making a mental checklist as he went, crossing off the items he already had and making plans for the others. Kaz would need his instructions and likely some reading material on the planet itself, and Obi-Wan resolved to grab those things before their departure. Mind buzzing with excitement, he stepped into the fresher to complete the last of the tasks in his rooms. Kaz was waiting. He needed to hurry after all. Kaz was the first one down into the hangar, but not by much. He loitered there for a few minutes, checking out a shuttle for them to use before his master showed up, travel bag slung easily over one shoulder, armor absent, long brown overcloak in place and lightsaber gleaming from his hip. Kaz had had a similar thought about armor and had dressed in his Jedi tunics he'd gotten from the temple quartermaster the week prior, along with his own brown robe. Something about going on a Jedi rite of passage implied dressing the part, and he was glad he wasn't the only one who had that same thought. Cody appeared just after Obi-Wan, his own travel items slung over his shoulder, ready for his inspection tour vacation with Rex. Kaz smiled and waved at him, causing the commander to wander over to them, his gait relaxed, expression open, and his forced presence a placid calm. It had not been for the last week or so. Kaz could sense Cody and his master had worked out whatever issue that had been plaguing them. Ready to go, kid? Cody said as he and Obi-Wan arrived next to the shuttle. You ready to hang out with Rex? Yeah, I'm all set. Keep us updated on your progress, Obi-Wan said, joining the conversation. I'll be sure to send mission updates of our own, Cody grinned. I look forward to hearing about your trip in person, too. He nudged Kaz companionably in the shoulder. And I can't wait to see what your lightsaber looks like, kid. Me either, Kaz replied, nudging Cody back. Well, we'd best be off, Obi. Wan smiled a little, hands ringing on his travel bag straps idly. He didn't move, feet rooted to the spot and eyes still locked on Cody. He could acknowledge a certain reluctance to be doing this without him. Wouldn't want to be late, Cody said, eyes soft, fondness curving his lips. He didn't move either, simply letting himself enjoy the warm feelings moving back and forth down his bond with Obi-Wan. No, indeed, Obi-Wan murmured, entirely distracted by Cody. His easy posture, the bag over one shoulder held by his left hand, the polished gleam to his armor, the gentle smile on his lips, and the bright summer warmth in his eyes. He cleared his throat, looking away and breaking the moment. They really did have to go. Well, stay safe, Cody, and say hello to Rex for us. I'll pass on your regards, Cody replied, straightening up smartly. He nodded, but that warm fondness was still in his eyes. Stay safe, General. He reached out and ruffled Kaz's hair. And you too, kid. Don't get into any trouble. Kaz rolled his eyes. I won't. Darting forward, he wrapped his arms around Cody's ribs and held the other man tight for a moment. Koyasi, kote, koyasi, kazika. Prichursi mahai, Cody said as Kaz leaned away, one hand lingering on the cadet's shoulder. He looked up at Obi-Wan. Kayoisi, General. I will. Prichursi, mahai, Commander. Obi-Wan nodded solemnly, then turned his attention to his Padawan. Come along, Kaz. We have a bit of a journey ahead of us. Yes, Master. Kaz moved away from Cody and let himself be guided by a hand between his shoulder blades as Obi-Wan maneuvered the both of them to the shuttle Kaz had checked out. The cadet looked back over his shoulder to find Cody watching them, a look of longing already starting to form in his eyes. Kaz could feel it down their bond and pressed his hopeful anticipation back to Cody, as well as the care he had for the commander, delighting in the feeling flowing towards him in return. Cody had been a steadfast rock for him in a sea of change, and he had held both Kaz and his master afloat. Kaz hoped Cody had fun with Rex, but also could not wait until they were all back on the negotiator again, together, where they all belonged. As they stepped into the shuttle, his master set his bag down in the hold, and Kaz followed suit, knowing that that was where they would likely spend the bulk of their time. The trip to Ilum would take about a day, so they would likely have to sleep at some point on the way there and back. Kaz had picked a shuttle with bunks already installed in the hold, not wanting to spend the night on the Durasteel floor. Pre-flight checklist, takeoff procedures, and all the other administrative items required to leave the ship accomplished, they were out of the hangar and into free space in no time. Kaz helped Obi-Wan plot the course, jumped to light speed, set the autopilot, and then the two of them left the cockpit to settle into the small seating area in the cargo hold itself. They were tired from the events of the day chasing the malevolence, and Kaz knew his master simply planned to meditate and then retire to sleep for the duration. As they settled into the seats, Kaz had the burning thought of what was going on between his master and Cody on the forefront of his mind, but was unsure if he should bring it up or not. He could sense his master had a large amount of trepidation for things like that, and knew that it was some Jedi issue that Kaz did not fully understand, not having been raised in the temple like Obi-Wan. That thought, however, gave him somewhere to start. Master? Yes, Padawan. Obi-Wan looked up from the datapad he had been perusing, questioning expression on his face. What exactly is Ilum like? I read all about it in my learning modules, but a first-hand account is always better, Kaz said, settling into his seat and relaxing back, resting his hands on the tabletop. Well, Obi-Wan began, setting his pad down and leaning back into his seat, crossing his arms, right arm balanced on his left, and right hand gesturing easily on his wrist. As you know, it's an ice planet, hence the cold weather gear in our packs. The core of the planet is surrounded by crystalline kyber, and the crystals themselves grow naturally there. The entrance to the crystal caves is only available at certain times of the day and the year when the sun is high in the sky. We are coming up on the end of the summer cycle, so the time you will have to traverse the caves will be slightly more limited. Does anything live there? Yes. There are several non-sentient animal species that populate the planet, but no other higher life forms. Do they live in the crystal caves? No, not usually, Obi-Wan replied, hand stroking over his beard in thought. Although they have been known to occasionally venture inside. Best be on the lookout. Kaz barely stifled the urge to gulp and just nodded. Got him. Watch out for big furry things that want to eat me. Gorgodons in particular, Obi-Wan continued. One hasn't been spotted in the caves for quite some time, but that doesn't mean they won't come in. They're reptiles, right? Kaz said, eyes going distant and flicking back and forth in recall as he tried to remember his lessons. Covered in gray fur, orange skin? Yes. Kaz blew out a breath and looked up. His hands spasmed on the tabletop, but he did not start twitching his fingers. Fun. Obi-Wan merely nodded and turned his attention to assessing his Padawan. Kaz had been with them coming up on 3 months now. He was very far removed from the small, scared cadet they had plucked up from Kamino, but there were still shades of anxiety lurking in his force presence and in his mannerisms. There had not been a repeat of the incident on Christophsis, but rather a series of smaller hiccups that Obi-Wan and Cody had been able to adeptly manage. Kaz had caught on to releasing his emotions into the Force with an alacrity Obi-Wan envied. Kaz's flash-in-the-pan feelings dissipated easily into the Force, unlike Obi-Wan's own deep-rooted ones. Kaz seemed to blithely travel through life in a cheerful, easygoing way that reminded Obi-Wan of Qui-Gon strongly. His old master was much the same, but where Kaz was cheerful, Qui-Gon was quiet and solemn, more akin to an old tree unaffected by the whims of others than Kaz's summer breeze. Still, the power of the living force flowed through him and guided him with an effortlessness that Obi-Wan had marveled at in his master and was glad to see in his Padawan. Kaz, despite the trauma of his early childhood, was carefree and bright. "How are you, Padawan?" Obi-Wan asked into the quiet that had settled over them. Kaz gave him a quizzical look. "What do you mean? You've been with me for a few months now," Obi-Wan continued, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "We have been training together and you have been learning to be a Jedi. How do you feel about it so far?" Kaz crossed his arms and stared down at the tabletop in thought, giving the question the consideration it deserved. He looked up after a moment, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm feeling good, Master. Much better than I did on Kamino. I used to feel like the room was going to close in on me and squish me into nothing, but I don't feel like that anymore. It's like I found fresh air." "And what of life on the Negotiator?" Obi-Wan asked, some small part of him fretting over the fact that Kaz and many other new Padawans throughout the Order were not able to grow and learn in the comfort of the temple. "Good so far," Kaz answered with an easy shrug. "Cody, Helix, and the rest of Ghost Company are pretty awesome. Cody is always there for me, and we have Dinks, just like you are." "Yes, Cody is very helpful," Obi-Wan said with a smile, neatly sidestepping the comment about himself. Cody had taken to caring for Kaz like a noddle into water, easily navigating the ups and downs of child-rearing after that one large speed bump on Christophsis. Cody had learned to lean into Obi-Wan when Kaz was agitated, and the commander's emotional turmoil from before had not made a reappearance. It helped that Kaz had learned that when Cody issued orders to him, it was for his own good and protection, and not because he wanted Kaz to be a good soldier. Obi-Wan had also learned to head Kaz off at the pass by periodically asking the cadet if there was anything he needed to discuss, and felt that now would be a good moment to do so. "Is there anything bothering you, Padawan?" Kaz frowned again in thought, carefully thinking that one through. "No?" He paused and his face twisted up into an unsure expression. "Well, maybe." "What?" Obi-Wan felt his spine straighten and folded his hands together gently. The first few times he'd done this had been extremely awkward and uncomfortable, but exposure had proved the cure to that. Kaz stopped, shifting in his chair and eyes darting around the room. "Well, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like you and Cody are tense. I'm not sure. Not like you're fighting, but like something is misaligned." He made an annoyed sound. "It's hard to explain. And it doesn't really bother me, but it makes me worry about you." Obi-Wan rolled that revelation carefully around in his mind, considering it from as many angles as possible quickly. Yes, he had noticed the odd tension that would build up and snap between Cody and himself, most notably from their night at 79's. Yes, he knew what was causing such a thing. No, he was not ready to deal with it and decidedly did not want to have that conversation with his Padawan. However, he was clearly running out of time to deal with it if Kaz was picking up on it and it was bothering the cadet. Perhaps he and Cody would have to talk and come to an agreement as soon as they each got back. Obi-Wan cleared his throat. I know, he blew out a long breath and released his discomfort into the Force. "But I'm afraid that's between Cody and myself. Don't worry about us." "All right, Master." Kaz seemed skeptical but let it pass, recognizing that his master was right, and it was between the Jedi and the commander. "If you're sure." "I am," Kaz smirked. "I'm happy here, Master. You should stop worrying too." "That, I'm afraid, will never happen." Obi-Wan smiled at his apprentice. "I am your master. It is my prerogative to worry about you. I still worry about Anakin even though he is a knight now. And I will worry about you too, just the same." Kaz rolled his eyes but didn't comment on that statement. They existed in comfortable silence for a few more moments before Kaz thought of another question to ask. "So, Master?" "Yes?" Obi-Wan looked up from his datapad that he had gotten engrossed in again. "What exactly is the gathering like?" Ahsoka said it's different for every Jedi and said something about relying on the Force and vision quests. But the stuff in my lessons was even more vague than that. "That's the general gist of it," Obi-Wan set the pad down. "At this time of year, you'll have about 6 hours in the caves before the entrance freezes over and you're stuck there until the next morning. Later in the year, you could be there for several days, if not weeks. How do I know if I found my crystal or not? Or what if I don't even have one at all? Ah, now that's the trick, isn't it?" Master Obi-Wan leaned back and crossed his arms, one eyebrow raised at Kaz. "You would have to trust in the Force to find the answer to those questions. If you listen carefully, it will tell you everything you need to know." Kaz scowled, suddenly realizing the shape of what he was about to do. "It's a test? A test to see if the training is working or not?" Crossing his arms, Kaz glared over at his master. I thought the Jedi weren't like the trainers. Alarm shot through Obi-Wan, making him lean forward hastily and sit upright. No, Kaz, that's not it at all. When his apprentice still looked distrustful, Obi-Wan continued. It's not a test to see if your training is working, or to see if you're meeting quality standards. It's more of a rite of passage than a performance evaluation. And if you must see it as a test, it is a test of your connection to, and your ability to trust, the Force. Your training is not being assessed. Kaz's scowl lifted a little, but he was still visibly unsure. What happens if I don't get a crystal? If I fail? Kaz, not finding a crystal is not failure. Obi-Wan's voice was as soft and as gentle as he could make it. It simply means you aren't meant to be a knight. There are other things you can be within the Jedi Order that do not include running around with a lightsaber. A soft-shelled Jedi, Kaz scoffed, not looking pleased at that thought. I'm not one of those. I like to fight, to be there on the ground with my brothers. I don't want to be stuck on the ship or in the temple. Then you won't be. You'll find a crystal? Just because I want to? Kaz raised an eyebrow and gave Obi-Wan a look that said he clearly thought this line of reasoning subpar. Yes, precisely, Obi-Wan replied, not even fazed by that look. Because you want it, you will succeed. The Force has a plan for you, a path for you to walk, and that plan includes the things you want for yourself and, sometimes, things that you had no idea you needed until you had them. If you are in tune with it and patient, it will guide you. As he spoke, Obi-Wan watched his apprentice relax by degrees as both his words and the Force washed over Kaz. Obi-Wan felt it swirl and move between the two of them, ebbing and flowing like an ocean tide, and was suddenly struck by the words he'd just said. Cody's face flashed across his mind, the way his eyes glittered in the artificial light of the ship, his polished armor, his charming smile, the roguish scar that wound down the side of his face, his steadfast nature and his spiky sunburst presence in the Force. Obi-Wan was made viscerally aware of the fact that Cody was someone he had no idea he needed until the man was neatly dropped in his lap by fate, and that there was very little he would not do to keep the commander by his side. The precarious nature of the life he was living now made a stark contrast to the one he'd had before the war. Cody, stalwart and true by his side, Kaz happy and carefree between them, Anakin reckless, argumentative and loyal, and Rex sarcastic and playful, Ahsoka trailing in his shadow. His small, new, shiny, cobbled-together little family that he hadn't even realized he'd built for himself until the Force quite nearly brained him over the head with it. He'd found many things he did not know he needed until they were right there in front of him. He was hopelessly and completely attached to them, and he knew himself well enough to know there was nothing that would change it. The one thing that had plagued him since his days in the creche was still the one thing that plagued him now. His strong, vibrant, lasting, and clinging emotions. Try as he might, he had not been able to conquer them, merely shift them away from prying eyes. Are you okay? Kaz's hesitant voice snapped Obi-Wan out of his shock-inducing ruminations, and he looked back at his apprentice with a carefully schooled expression. He cleared his throat and spoke. Yes, sorry, Padawan. I'm afraid the Force had something important to impart to me. Not to worry. Are you sure? I could feel that you were upset, Kaz replied, leaning forward and reaching for his master's hand that was resting on the table. He grabbed Obi-Wan's index and middle fingers in his own. Obi-Wan smiled and curled his fingers around Kaz's smaller ones, giving the cadet's hand a light shake. Yes, I'm sure. It just startled me. All right, Kaz let go and leaned back again. He waved his hand towards the bunks, knowing by now that his master did not like to discuss heavy emotions right away, if at all. That had taken some getting used to at first, but after Cody had explained it, Kaz had understood. We should probably get some sleep, Master. We've been running around after General Grievous's ship all day. I know I'm tired. That's a good idea, Kaz. Sleep sounds marvelous. Obi-Wan pushed to his feet, absurdly grateful for the distraction, Kaz following easily. They got ready for bed quickly, Obi-Wan dimming the lights with the Force once they were on their bunks. He stared up at the ceiling in the near dark, pondering the revelation he'd been given minutes ago. The Force was sometimes very heavy-handed with him, and it appeared this was one of those times. He would be a self-deceiving fool if he did not acknowledge the fact that he had developed feelings for Cody and that those feelings were very much returned. He had in fact noticed that Cody had been displaying hints about a month before they'd rescued Kaz. Obi-Wan had not been worried about it then, just thinking it a passing infatuation. He was sure it would have remained that way had Kaz not entered the picture. The cadet had changed everything, bringing himself and Cody closer together and allowing for a rapid and remarkable growth of trust between them. Enough so that Obi-Wan had made a stable emotional connection to Cody without conscious thought. He and Cody were linked together by a strong bond that resonated in his Force presence like a golden cord. There was no escaping the reality of what he and Cody were and what they had the potential to become. There was no escaping the fact that their mutual infatuation had grown beyond that, and Obi-Wan would make himself a liar if he did not label their feelings love. Obi-Wan just hoped they could wait until the end of the war. He could not afford to be distracted, and neither could Cody. They would have to power through and be patient. Obi-Wan hoped Cody agreed with his assessment, but he had the sneaking suspicion that his commander might see things differently, and that when push came to shove, Cody would end up winning that argument. He played at being strong and resisting the pull of his own heart, but Obi-Wan knew his own instinctual reactions proved that false. That thought floating around in his mind, Obi-Wan drifted off into an anxious and restless slumber. The ship's alarms woke them, the telltale ringing letting them know they were approaching their destination and would soon drop out of hyperspace. Kaz rolled bleary-eyed out of his bed, noting his master doing the same across from him. Stumbling and staggering, they made their way to the cockpit, and Obi-Wan began to operate the controls, coming awake quickly once higher brain function was required. Lurching out of hyperspace, the shuttle coasted easily into Ilum's orbit, the cyan and purple swirls of light speed fading away. Hanging like a pearl in space, Ilum's white-blue snow-covered surface gleamed at them from the viewport of the shuttle. Kaz leaned forward in his seat, eager eyes taking in every detail of their approach towards the planet and feeling out with the Force as he did. It was much less vibrant than Coruscant or even Tatooine. Much of the surface was barren in the Force. Vast expanses of nothing but frozen water went on for miles and miles. They came around into the atmosphere, Master Obi-Wan adeptly guiding the shuttle to their destination. Large glaciers, vast crevices, ragged canyons, and towering mountains zipped by them as they traveled towards the old temple on the planet. The closer they got, the thicker the blowing snow became until Kaz realized that they were flying through a blizzard. Master Obi-Wan looked down at the sensors and then started the landing sequence shortly after. Kaz could barely make out the vague shape of a rock formation just outside of the shuttle as it landed with a soft thump. Unbuckling himself, Kaz darted to the cargo hold, intent on donning the cold weather gear that he'd had brought to the shuttle. The pants were far too big for him, made for a fully grown trooper, so he just pulled the coat around his shoulders, the tails of it brushing the backs of his calves. It would have to do, he supposed. He put his goggles on, pulled up the hood of his traveling robe, and then the fur-lined hood of his coat. As he did, he turned to face his master, who was similarly attired. Silently, they both made for the docking ramp that was lowering with ease despite the cold temperatures. They walked down the ramp and stepped into the blizzard. Kaz felt like his breath was punched out of his lungs. The cold was a shock, like dropping into the training pools on Kamino. Pulling the edges of his traveling robe over his nose and chin, Kaz cinched his coat hood as tight as it would go, wrapped his arms around himself, and doggedly followed his master through the blizzard. Visibility was so poor, Kaz could barely see Obi-Wan even the few feet away that he was. The cadet found himself relying on the Force to sense where his master was and followed the other Jedi's intentions. His legs were a little cold for his liking, but Kaz was glad of his tall boots and the too large coat as they covered his thin Jedi leggings. Suddenly, Kaz could see a towering wall of ice in front of them, and he could make out vague details of some impressively sized ice statues on either side of a frozen archway. Obi-Wan stopped in front of it and reached out with the Force, shattering the ice with a deafening crack. Ice and snow rained down with a resounding crash that made Kaz slap his hands over his ears. More snow and ice billowed out, then Kaz could see a dark cave where the sheet of ice had been. Master Obi-Wan said nothing, leading them both inside the cave. The moment they stepped in, the howling of the wind quieted and the freeze in Kaz's bones started to thaw. They walked through a short passage that dumped out into a frankly impressive atrium. Kaz stopped, jaw dropping, and stared around the room, marveling at what his eyes were telling him. Several stories tall, a chamber had been carved out of rock and ice. There were several floors with old columns and pillars, along with a circle of large, chiseled monuments of Jedi, each with their lightsabers drawn. In the center of the room there was a ring of small pyramids made of ice and a raised dais in the center of them. Master Obi-Wan made his way there and Kaz followed, head on a swivel as he tried to see everything about the room at once. As he walked to the center behind his master, Kaz became aware of a multitude of voices singing all around him. He concentrated on them and realized immediately what they were. They sounded like Master Obi-Wan and General Skywalker's lightsabers, and Kaz knew he was hearing all the crystals inside the cave. Their beautiful aria bathed over him, and Kaz took a moment to just bask in the most glorious sound he had ever heard. One song seemed to rise above the rest, its timbre and pitch the most pleasing of them all. Kaz focused on it, a smile starting to tug at his lips. That one. You wanted to find that one. Padawan? Kaz jolted, his master's voice knocking him rudely into the present. He shook his head, clearing the cobwebs, and jogged over to the dais where his master was waiting. Sorry, Master, it's just, they all sound so pretty. A slow smile shaped Obi-Wan's lips. Yes, they do, don't they? Did you hear one you liked? Alec! Kaz nodded vigorously, his hands coming up to grasp at the open neck of his coat. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet. Can I start now? In a moment, Obi-Wan said, smile fading into a solemn look. He folded his arms and regarded Kaz seriously. You may see, hear, and feel things that change you, that scare you, and that challenge you. These experiences are yours. You do not need to ever speak of them unless you wish to. They belong to you alone. The Force will be with you always, even if you cannot feel it. Trust the Force, Padawan. I will see you when your quest is complete. Kaz nodded, then following an instinct, bowed to his master. When he straightened, he spoke. I will trust the Force, Master Obi-Wan, and return. May the Force be with you, and also with you. Obi-Wan pointed towards a tunnel to their left. Oh, Padawan. I will be here, meditating until your arrival. Kaz tugged on the coat around his shoulders, took in a deep, fortifying breath, then set off towards the tunnel. Behind him, he heard the swish of fabric that told him his master had settled on the floor to sink into the Force while Kaz was on his quest. The entrance to the tunnel was tall, perhaps able to fit a gear tank through, but it would be a tight squeeze. It was dark and imposing, and when Kaz crossed into the tunnel proper, it felt like diving headfirst into the Kaminoan Sea. The Force shattered around him, his ears popped, his skin tingled, and the tunnel flashed dark and light before his eyes until it settled back into a dank blackness. Kaz coughed hard, feeling like ice had thrust itself down his throat and gulped for air. The song of the crystal he'd heard so loud earlier was a faint ringing in his ears, but Kaz could still hear it, and he reached for it in the Force. It pinged feebly, but it still responded enough for Kaz to know he had to keep moving forward. Fishing around in his utility belt, Kaz found a glow wand and snapped it, activating the chemicals inside and creating a green light to guide him. It didn't illuminate more than perhaps 10 feet in front of him, but it was enough to not fall down some hole or trip over his own 2 feet. Sinking into the Force like he was trying to meditate, Kaz immersed himself in its currents, following the tugging and the song of his crystal. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, and it got wider and taller as it did, stalactites and stalagmites growing larger and more common as he went. Occasionally there was a flash of glittering light in the walls, and Kaz knew he was passing kyber crystals. He walked and walked and walked for what felt like hours, doggedly following the song of his crystal when he started to hear a new sound. He stopped, ears pricking, and held his breath, listening intently. Alarm lanced through him when he placed the sound. Blast of fire. From a DC-50A, taking off before he thought better of it, Kaz sprinted towards the sound, praying to the Force that the Seppies hadn't followed them here. He didn't have his DC-17, he didn't have his training saber, he didn't have anything but the Force and his wits. That didn't matter to him as he ran, feet pounding on stone and green light from his glow stick bouncing in time with his arms. Abruptly, the tunnel led out into a moderately sized cave, and what Kaz saw caused his blood to freeze colder than all the ice surrounding him. Reflected into the frozen walls and the floor were people. They were so distorted it took Kaz a moment to place them, but when he did, he let out a distressed groan. They were vowed, armors in all different colors, but what made him gasp was the display in the center of the cave. Glowstick clattering to the ground from nerveless fingers, Kaz watched as Cody hefted his DC-50A to his shoulder and fired mercilessly on a defenseless Obi-Wan. Master Obi? Wan's face went from the delighted smile he always had near Cody to a horror-struck look as he dropped, blaster burns all along his chest. His body hit the ice with a thump, and that was when Kaz's brain rebooted. No! Kaz screamed, running forward so fast he lost his balance and hit the ice hard, palms and knees stinging. Scrambling to his feet like it never happened, he launched himself at Cody and tackled the man to the floor. They landed with the shrieking crack of ice and the harsh rattle of plastoid. Kaz wrapped near-frozen and bleeding hands around whatever part of Cody's rifle he could reach, trying to wrestle it from the commander's grasp. What did you do? Cody, what did you do? Kaz was numb to the tears already falling from his eyes to pool in his goggles as he wrenched the weapon away from Cody with the Force, sending it flying across the cave and pinned the commander to the ground with its power in the same movement. Straddling the commander's abdomen, Kaz glared down at Cody's strangely blank face. What did you do? Good soldiers follow orders, Cody hollowly replied, arms flat on the ground, muscles limp and unresisting. What? Kaz gasped, breath hiccuping and tears blurring his vision. He yanked his goggles off his head and flung them away, swiping hurriedly at his eyes. What orders? You shot Master Obi-Wan. Good soldiers follow orders. No. Kaz seized Cody by the collar of his chest plate, near the commander's throat. He hauled the older man's upper body towards him and shook Cody in time with his words. There's no orders for this. You killed him. You killed him. You can't kill him. You love him. Cody, what did you do? Cody said nothing, empty amber gold eyes staring sightlessly up at Kaz. Kaz slammed him down viciously, cracking the ice underneath them and screaming out in his grief. Looking up, he noticed all around them in the ice that the same scene was playing out with different Jedi and their troopers. He watched as Jedi after Jedi were cut down, falling at the feet of the men that were supposed to follow them, to protect them, to fight with them. It felt heavy and inevitable in the force around him, filling the cave with a squeezing pressure that centered on his right temple. Kaz's head dropped, heaving sobs breaking out from behind his lips, and his forehead rested on Cody's shoulder, tears running down to pool on the commander's blacks. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. While gay baby. This can't be happening. While gay baby. You weren't even here. You were supposed to be with Rex. This can't be happening. Get up. A loud snapping voice caused Kaz's head to whip around and his upper body to pivot towards the source. Behind him, standing tall and proud, was Brick. The Cinetine bounty hunter's arms were crossed, and an unimpressed expression was on his face. He sneered down at Kaz, uncaring of the grief pouring off the boy in waves. When Kaz didn't move, he stalked over and reached out, hauling Kaz upright by the scruff of his coat. Kaz yelped, barely able to keep his feet when Brick unceremoniously released him. I let you go for a few months, and you turn into this sniveling mess? Unbelievable, Brick scoffed, lip curling up unpleasantly. You really are pathetic, aren't you? Kaz's fists clenched at his sides, and he abruptly wished he hadn't thrown Cody's rifle across the cave as he dearly wanted to brandish it in Brick's face. No, sir, Master Chief. What's that? Brick leaned in, towering over Kaz threateningly. What did you say, clone? I said. No, sir. Kaz snapped, spine straightening and hot glare in his eyes. His jaw set into a stubborn line and anger flared out from his chest. I'm not pathetic. You are... Brick growled and his hands snapped out, hauling Kaz up to eye level by the lapels of his coat. You think you're hot shit because you're training to be a Jedi? Or nothing. You'll fail at this just like you failed at everything else, CT-921-2. It's not my name, Kaz snapped back. Isn't it? Brick shook him hard, making Kaz's molars rattle. No! Kaz yelped as Brick dropped him, feet sliding on the ice. The bounty hunter grabbed him again by the scruff of his neck and forced him around to look at the scene still playing out in the ice in front of them. Do you see this? This is what you're made for. Brick threw out his free arm, gesturing at the bodies of Obi-Wan and Cody on the floor. Good soldiers follow orders, cadet. This isn't following orders, Kaz growled, trying and failing to wrench himself out of Brick's grip. He had never been able to break the trainer's hold before, and it seemed he would not be starting now. This is murder. You were built for this, Brick snarled. Murder, chaos, destruction. And you presume to become a Jedi? You will fall. I won't. Kaz twisted, hands wrapping around the arm behind his head, and he struck out with the force, making Brick cry out in pain and release him. Kaz skittered away, calling Cody's abandoned rifle to him with the force and pointing the business end at the bounty hunter. You stay away from me. Oh, look at this! Brick smirked, looking entirely unconcerned. Now you have the power. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to make sure you won't hurt any more of my brothers, Kaz snarled, hands tightening around the rifle, palms sweating into the metal. He flicked off the safety and brought it up to his shoulder, sighting down the barrel. I'm not the one hurting them, clone. That's you. Brick laughed, arms crossing casually over his chest. He made no move to avoid the blaster pointed at his heart. You swan around the galaxy acting like a real person, and you know what that does? It makes them all envious, discontent. They burn with it when they see you. What? Kaz muttered, blaster lowering a little from his shoulder. He corrected his aim, scowling. You're wrong. How are you going to protect them from you? Brick flicked a lazy hand through the air. Some guardian you are. But go on, murder me and assuage your conscience. I'm sure that'll help things along. Kaz felt his pulse start to pound in his ears, vision tinging red at the edges. You tormented me. You beat me. You kept me down, and you tried to get me killed. And not just me. Tell me why I shouldn't end you right here and now. Well, Brick purred. This is what you really are underneath? Your true colors are showing, Cadet, and they aren't flattering. He slapped at his chest plate, the sound bouncing loudly off the walls. Shoot me. Kill me, and then kill your brothers next. Kaz felt his trigger finger twitch and the force howled in his ears. Gasping, feeling its power pounding through him, Kaz felt like he was being shorn in two. Half of him wanted nothing more than to put Brick down, and the other half was begging him to drop the rifle, to let it go. Was he better? Was he more than a meat droid made for war and murder? Or was that all he would ever be? Chest heaving, right temple throbbing in time with his heartbeat, Kaz dropped the rifle. It bounced off the floor with a pinging thunk and skittered across the ice, stopping halfway between himself and Brick. Who, when Kaz looked up at him, was no longer Brick. Instead, it was another Jedi, older, with a well-kept beard, long hair, and a prominent nose with kind blue eyes. He smiled at Kaz, and Kaz felt like he should know this man even though he did not remember meeting him before. Abruptly, Kaz noticed that the bodies of Obi-Wan and Cody were gone, and the ice around them no longer held images of dying Jedi and murderous clones. When the other Jedi didn't speak, Kaz did. Hello? Hello, young Kaz. His voice was deep with a soothing lilt to it that reminded Kaz of his master, but slightly different. Who are you? Kaz asked, curiosity taking over his mouth. How do you know me? Of course I know you, the man said with a smile. You are the Padawan of my Padawan. Kaz's jaw dropped and he gasped. Qui-Gon, Jin. His eyes narrowed and he wished for the blaster again. But you're dead. Yes, I am, Qui-Gon replied, entirely unbothered by this reality. I became one with the Force on Naboo at the hands of the Sith apprentice Darth Maul. Then how are you here? Many things are possible in the netherworld of the Force, Qui-Gon said serenely, as if that was enough of an explanation. All right, Kaz said slowly, knowing on some level that he wasn't going to get a more coherent explanation from the dead Jedi. Then why are you talking to me? You are important, Kaz, Qui-Gon said slowly, hands folding into his sleeves in a painfully familiar gesture. Many things hinge on you and your choices. I had to see if you would succeed. My choices? Kaz's face screwed up in confusion and he braced his fists on his hips. What do you mean? You are an unforeseen event. Qui-Gon's voice was calm, soothing, his face betraying nothing. You changed the flow of what would have been. He locked piercing blue eyes onto Kaz's amber ones. You can save him, Kaz. You can save Obi-Wan. Save him? Kaz's arms dropped, eyes widening in surprise. Save him from what? From himself, Qui-Gon sighed, his expression twisting into one of sorrow, the first bit of emotion he'd shown. Kaz felt it radiating out from the other man in the Force like a breeze. He believed himself destined for a life of infinite sadness. You changed that. Now keep going. Your brothers need you, Kaz. Don't give up. Kaz gulped, nodding, and let his thumbs rest on the edges of his coat pockets. I won't. He paused, the conflict playing out on his face before he pulled together his bravery. He misses you. He talks about you a lot. He says I remind him of you. If you can visit me, maybe you should go see him too. This caused Qui-Gon to grin behind his beard, the light dancing in his eyes. I will, young Kaz. When the time is right, I will. I miss him too, he laughed, shaking his head. And I suppose he's right. You do remind me of me. Kaz grinned back, hope flaring in his chest. Good. Now there's more that awaits you here in the caves. Qui-Gon shifted, standing up straighter and lifting his chin. You'd best be on your way. Kaz nodded, turning his head to look at the tunnel across from the entrance he'd used, assessing it. When he looked back, Qui-Gon was gone, and the cave was empty. Air whooshed from his lungs, and he spun around in place, noticing nothing but the green light from his glow stick making fractal patterns on the walls. Yeah, there was nothing. He was in the cave alone again. Staggering, he walked up to his goggles, picking them up and putting them in his coat pocket. Next, he picked up his glow stick and looked for a way out of the cave that was not back the way he came, shoving the trauma of what had just happened away to deal with later. On the opposite end, the tunnel oozed an ominous feeling from it that reminded Kaz of Asajj Ventress. He gulped. Okay. Sure. Seems fine. Blowing out a breath and shaking out his arms, Kaz started to walk. His heart was still pounding, and his limbs felt filled with air, thigh muscles coiled tight from the roller coaster of emotions he'd just been on. He clenched his jaw, hands and fingers coiling into fists, and marched headlong into the dark, creepy hallway in front of him. There was no way out but through. The first step into the tunnel, Kaz wanted to about face and sprint out of it. The call of his crystal was barely audible, and it felt like the dark side of the Force was actively trying to eat him whole. Kaz shut his eyes, shoving his emotions into the Force and drawing on it with all the strength he had. Taking a risk, he dropped his shields to almost nothing, keeping only the barest barrier between himself and the Force to make sure he did not get lost in it. It made the dark side even more potent, but the song of his crystal chimed like a bell. He grinned, opened his eyes and started walking, glow stick held aloft like a lantern. He was a trooper. Vod, a Jedi. He would not be defeated by this. He would find his crystal, and no schemes of the dark side were going to stop him. You seem awfully sure of that. Kaz yelped and whirled around, eyes going wide when he spotted General Skywalker behind him. Suspicious. After the event in the ice cave, Kaz's eyes narrowed and he regarded the other man carefully. You aren't really here. Ha! You caught on finally, Anakin sneered. He shrugged, then motioned out with his arms, indicating the whole of the temple around them. But what is real anyway? If you see me and I can talk to you, doesn't that make me real enough? So what, you're a figment of my imagination? A projection of the Force? Kaz crossed his arms, cocked his hip, and scoffed. I'm not afraid of you. Yeah, you really should be, Anakin said, arms coming to hang loosely at his sides. It was then that Kaz noticed there was something different about the General's eyes. He lifted his glow stick to see better and sucked in a startled breath. General Skywalker's eyes were not blue, they were a sickly jaundiced yellow. He looked pale and sweaty, hair greasy and matted, clothes a solid black with gleaming silver accents. Goosebumps shot straight down Kaz's spine at that, and some old instinct screamed at him to run. I'm not, Kaz said, pushing his fear away, hand clenching around the glow stick. I don't know what's wrong with you, and I don't care. You can't hurt me. Oh, such confidence, Anakin laughed rudely. He called his saber to his hand but did not ignite it. Where was that when you were bawling your eyes out? Kaz's teeth ground together and the muscles in his jaw jumped. You shut up! Yeah, sorry, no can do. Anakin started to walk forward with the loping gait of a predator that had found its lunch. A satisfied smirk tugged at his lips. You aren't leaving here. I hope you're okay with that. I am leaving here, Kaz snapped back, shifting into a fighting stance. He knew this wasn't really General Skywalker, but everything about the apparition was intimidating, and he responded to the threat. I'm going to find my crystal, and I'm going to leave here. You won't, Anakin snapped, stopping and igniting his lightsaber. It glowed crimson red, swallowing the feeble light from Kaz's glow stick and making the walls shine like they were covered in wet blood. You're out of time. He's going to abandon you like he abandoned me. Master Obi-Wan didn't abandon you, Kaz snarled, left arm thrusting out emphatically. And he won't abandon me. You'll be stuck here and they'll ship your frozen corpse back to Kamino for study. No, I won't. I won't let you take my master from me. Anakin howled and launched forward, red blade raised high in attack. General Skywalker, stop! Kaz yelped, barely ducking the swing. No! Anakin lashed out, slicing for Kaz's head again violently. You think you can just show up out of nowhere and have everything I ever wanted? Well, you're wrong. I didn't take anything from you. Kaz tucked into a roll, shoulder hitting roughly on the stone as he somersaulted past Anakin and popped up behind the other man, kicking his legs out from under him. You have everything I do, Anakin just screamed inarticulately, kipped up and struck at Kaz again. Kaz dodged, ducked, weaved, and juked away from the angry general's blade, but he was starting to tire and knew that he would not be able to dodge forever. Suddenly, opportunity presented itself and Kaz went for a blow of his own. Snapping out like a snake, he grabbed Anakin's wrist in one hand and his elbow in the other, bringing the forearm down as hard as he could onto his knee, sending the crimson lightsaber clattering to the floor. Skywalker howled in pain and flung Kaz away from him with a powerful sweep of the Force. Ah! Air whooshing from his lungs, Kaz landed in a heap on the stone. Miraculously, he turned his head and saw the hilt of Anakin's deactivated saber right by his hand. Snapping it up, Kaz leapt to his feet and swung. The blood-red blade stopped millimeters from General Skywalker's neck, and the man stared him down over it. Stop, Kaz commanded, chest heaving and breath coming quick. Stay right there. You won't do it. Anakin smirked at him, gleeful light in his sulfur-colored eyes. You don't have the guts to kill me. Just like you didn't have the guts to kill Brick. I will if I have to, Kaz retorted hotly. He rolled his eyes. Besides, you aren't real. If I cut you down, nothing would happen. You sure about that, kid? Anakin said carefully, calculating expression on his face. Kaz paused, considering that for a moment. He stared into Anakin's yellow eyes rimmed with red and felt like the galaxy was spinning out from within them. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff and looking down into the abyss below. Voices whispered at him to jump, and common sense begged him to stay still. Qui-Gon's soothing brogue echoed in his ears, reminding Kaz of the promise he'd made. Blood-hot, heart-pounding, pulse swooshing in his ears, Kaz contemplated whether or not he should decapitate the apparition under his stolen sword. Piercing through the fog, the ethereal song of his crystal tugged on Kaz's heart. With a snapping hiss, the red blade retracted back into the hilt. Kaz flipped it in the air and held it out, handle first to Anakin. The general raised a single eyebrow at him but made no moves to take back his weapon. That's what you're going with? Anakin said blandly. Self-sacrifice? No, Kaz answered, wailing the deactivated lightsaber lightly at Skywalker. I'm making the right choice. I'm not a killer. The right choice? He quoted derisively. He sneered. How very Jedi of you. Kaz's eyes narrowed. You're one too. What's it matter? Anakin's hand snatched out and wrapped around the hilt of the saber before Kaz was ready, and he yanked the cadet right up to him with it. Kaz gulped and looked up at the much taller man, feeling his pulse jump in his neck. They were nearly nose to nose as the general leaned down to hiss at him. You think I'm a Jedi? That's adorable. You are. You're a general in the— No! Anakin flung the boy away, and for the second time, Kaz was sprawled out on the icy stone. Skywalker ignited the saber again and stalked forward, holding the point under Kaz's chin. He grinned, but it sent chills clinking down Kaz's vertebrae. I am more than the pathetic Jedi, Kaz snarled, taking offense at that statement. The Jedi aren't weak. I am going to cut you down and be rid of you. Anakin growled, chest heaving and the hand holding his lightsaber starting to shake, causing the tip to come worryingly close to Kaz's chin. And then Obi-Wan will be mine. Kaz swallowed hard, throat clicking, but he didn't move, not daring to hardly breathe to keep from being impaled through the jaw. He locked eyes with Skywalker. Fine. Do your worst, but it won't get you what you want. It will, Skywalker seethed, nostrils flaring and eyes flashing. He looked at Kaz like he would sear him to ash with just the power of his gaze. Kaz just looked steadily up at him and said nothing, leaning into the Force, the haunting song of his crystal, the feeling of his bonds with Obi-Wan and Cody, and the brightly sparking notes of the Kyber all around him. Eyes slipping closed, he waited for the killing blow to land. If he had to die to keep his brother safe, to keep Obi-Wan safe, he would. Air whistled past his face, the fire hot of the general's blade pulling away, then coming roaring back with a hissing snap. Plasma-scorching heat seared up Kaz's face and neck, and his whole world disappeared into a haze of red. He screamed, feeling his vocal cords tear, tasting blood on the back of his tongue as fire licked up each of his nerve endings. The Force was a whirlwind around him, voices, music, blaster fire, ship's engines, the sounds of droids marching, jetpacks firing, mortar shells, explosions, and good soldiers follow orders howling over the cacophony. Like all the air was sucked from the room, deafening silence descended, and Kaz hauled in gasping breaths like he'd run a marathon. Haltingly, he opened his eyes to find himself on his knees, bloody palms pressed on the cold stone, jacket open and pooling around his waist, green glow stick under the fingers of his left hand. Shockily, he curled his fingers around it and pushed to his feet. As he did, he noticed something sparkling in the wall at eye level. The wind chime and breeze song of his crystal reached a crescendo, and Kaz lifted his right arm, hand outstretched, and touched the glittering Kyber in the wall. Carefully, he picked around the edges of it, wiggling it gently back and forth until it detached from the wall with a sharp snap. Sitting innocently in his palm, the Kyber twinkled up at him, its song a giddy melody that reminded Kaz of watching the fish in the sea. Gently, he closed his fingers around it, pressing the crystal to his chest, then slipped it into a pouch on his belt. Casting one last look at the dark but no longer foreboding tunnel, Kaz felt with the Force for the way out. It seemed much easier to determine than the way in, and he followed his bond with Master Obi-Wan like a homing beacon, easily trekking through the ice-coated caves and tunnels until he was once again in the large circular atrium. Relief flooded through Kaz, making his legs weak when he spotted his master seated next to the dais deep in meditation. Kaz approached him, footsteps echoing loudly on the frozen stone. Obi-Wan's eyes opened, and his head turned to look at his apprentice. Well? Kaz fished his crystal out of the pouch he'd stashed it in and held it aloft between his index finger and thumb. It was small, somewhere between a river stone and a droid popper, with jagged spikes protruding from it. I found it! Yes, you did! Obi-Wan pushed to his feet fluidly, like he hadn't just been sitting cross-legged for an undetermined amount of time on a frozen floor. Kaz came to a stop just in front of him, kyber crystal now resting heavily in the center of his right palm. It was hard, but I did it. It's always difficult, Obi-Wan said quietly, peering intently at the crystal but making no moves to pick it up and examine it closer. He looked up at Kaz and motioned towards the archway they had used to enter the temple. It was already halfway frozen over again. He reached out and clasped a hand on Kaz's shoulder, shaking lightly. Well done, Padawan. Padawan, very well done. He dropped his hand and smiled. Come, we should head back to the shuttle. Kaz grinned up at him and tucked his kyber crystal safely away again. Yes, master. He pulled his goggles on as they got closer to the exit, protecting his eyes from the cold. Huddled into his coat, Kaz once again followed his master through the blizzard, tracking the older Jedi with the Force more than his eyes. They arrived at the shuttle in short order, the docking ramp lowering smoothly to allow them back inside its welcoming warmth. Once the ramp was shut, Kaz pulled off all of his winter gear, setting it all neatly out on the floor to dry, as it was all soaked through with ice and snow. When he was done, he went to the cockpit, helping his master get them off the surface and into the atmosphere. Jumping to light speed was quick work, and all of a sudden they were once again seated at the small table in the cargo bay, a medium-sized box sitting on top of it between them. Kaz retrieved his crystal from the pouch it had been secured in and set it on the lid of the box, staring at it intently. Now that he could see it with proper lighting, it had a colored tint to it, a barely perceptible yellowed look. Its song was still as vibrant and sparkling as it had been in the cave. The only difference now was that it was the only one Kaz could hear, other than the faint harmony of his master's own kyber crystal. He looked up from his study and into his master's face, wondering exactly how it was one constructed a lightsaber. That question must have been easily read on his face because Master Obi-Wan smiled and unclipped his own saber from his belt and levitated it to the center of the table, floating it gently above the box of parts he'd brought with him for cause. Both hands held out in front of him, arms bent at the elbows and palms facing each other. Master Obi-Wan pulled and tugged at his lightsaber with the Force, pulling off each individual part until it was entirely disassembled, hovering over the table in an exploded view. A Jedi constructs his weapon with the Force, Obi-Wan began, voice easy and strong, eyes focused on his blade and the shining blue kyber crystal sitting innocently at the center of all the rest of the components. In order to do this, you must meditate. First with the crystal, then with the crystal and all the components together. Once the form of the blade is complete in your mind, you can build it with the Force. Fingers wiggling slightly, Obi-Wan reassembled his lightsaber, calling the completed weapon back to his hand and clipping it safely back to his belt. Kaz blew out a long breath, eyebrows rising briefly as he shook his head. He swallowed and pulled his legs up under himself, sitting cross-legged in the chair, resting his wrists lightly on his bent knees. All right, Kaz said quietly, eyes sliding closed. Do I need to do anything special, or should I just think really hard about it? Obi-Wan chuckled. Listen to its voice. The crystal will tell you everything you need to know, Kaz. Got it, Kaz mumbled, dropping easily into the meditation and tuning himself into the lilting melody coming from the kyber on the table in front of him. The song swirled like laughter over a bubbling stream or the breeze rustling through the trees. It was bright like the summer sun, golden light dazzling with the backdrop of a clear blue sky. Beneath the chords of living things, Kaz could sense an implacable determination, a strength of will that felt like solid metal pressed gently against his skin. The hilt of a Beskar flashed quickly across his mind's eye, and Kaz thought about training with Commander Colt on Kamino and then Cody on the Negotiator. The Jedi Guardian from that glorious day on Coruscant outside the temple was the next image to creep into his brain, and Kaz settled on the thoughts he'd had that day. Protecting his family, his aliat, was the most important thing to him. The Guardian lived solely for this purpose, and Kaz remembered believing he would have been that if he'd been raised in the temple. That, perhaps, was not quite correct, but he still felt drawn to them in a way. The kyber's song intensified, an allegro quick step, hammering home on that thought like a racing heartbeat. Kaz focused, reaching for its music and letting it surround him, move through and guide his thoughts. Images flowed through his mind. He could see his hands as they moved through katas, through fights, deflecting blaster bolts, crossing blades with a Sith. The hilt in his hand was metal wrapped in leatherous, and the blade at the end was a shining gold. The Kyber's song was deafening, thrumming through Kaz with an excited beat. Your end. It rejoiced. His eyes opened. On the table sitting on the box was a glittering golden Kyber crystal. The yellow cast to it intensified into a defined color. Kaz noticed he was alone, that his master had migrated over to the cockpit to monitor the ship as Kaz had meditated. Carefully, he reached out and lifted the crystal from the lid of the box, setting it gently down in front, then opened the container. Inside was a plethora of electronics pieces, parts, bits of metal, scraps of different fabrics, coverings, a strip of armor weave, and a length of dark tanned leatheress. Kaz pulled that free first, setting it down next to the crystal. It was the only thing he knew for sure was supposed to be on his saber. Remembering the instructions Master Obi-Wan had given him, Kaz once again closed his eyes and sunk into a meditation, this time reaching out with the Force to feel at all the components in the box, checking their resonance against that of his Kyber. It was slow going, but steadily Kaz was watching his lightsaber take shape. The emitter was cylindrical, but slashed down across the top, leaving one end taller than the other in a point that looked like the edge of a knife. The pommel was octagonal, the hilt itself a long cylinder of dark metal wrapped in leatherous, each end having a small, flat, circular guard to stop his hand from sliding either into the emitter or off the end of the pommel. The activator switch was just under the emitter, above the flat guard, and Kaz could see a stripe of 212th gold wrapped diagonally across the emitter and in a sunburst pattern on the pommel as finishing touches. His eyes snapped open, and he saw all the pieces he would need floating in the air in front of him, the golden Kyber in the center, just like his master's had been. Slowly, every bit of knowledge he had about electronics and mechanics floating to the surface of his thoughts, Kaz assembled the pieces. He could feel sweat beating down his back, slipping free from his shoulder blades to pool in his lower back, but he ignored it. Brow furrowed in concentration, Kaz's world narrowed to the floating bits of lightsaber in front of him. The crystal housing was complete, and he slid the Kyber carefully inside, the rest of the blade coming together quickly after that. Getting the housing just right was delicate work, a partnership between Jedi and crystal. The hilt was easier, and at last he was finished, securing the final end of the leatherous to the hilt just under the guard. Smiling, Kaz noticed the tiny bottle of gold paint in the bottom of the box, the kind the troopers used for touch-ups that had a little brush attached to the cap. He grabbed it out, painting the emitter and the pommel carefully. When he looked up, his master was standing to his left, arms crossed, left elbow propped up and left hand smoothing over his beard. It looked like he'd been watching for a little bit, and Kaz jolted slightly. Obi-Wan chuckled and smirked. Did I startle you? No, Kaz denied immediately and then flushed. He scratched the back of his head, completed saber still hovering in the air above the table. All right, maybe a little. Apologies, Obi-Wan stepped back, arms dropping to his sides. Okay, well, let's see it, Padawan. With that, Kaz reached out and plucked his saber from the air, holding it in his hands for the first time. Reverently, he smoothed his fingers over the hilt, feeling the supple, leatherous wrap, the cool metal, and the hum of the crystal beneath it all. Pushing his chair back, he stood, stepping a few paces away and gripping his lightsaber with both hands. He looked up at his master, self-depreciating smirk on his lips. Well, here goes nothing. Summoning his bravery, Kaz pressed the activator switch. His blade snapped to life with a thrumming hiss, a line of shining saffron light. Kaz grinned involuntarily, eyes locked on his golden blade and filled with wonder. He swung it through the air a few times, a delighted sound escaping his lips as it made the same noises as his master's and General Skywalker's. Got a lightsaber. He'd built a lightsaber. It works, Kaz laughed, unable to hold it in. His amber eyes flicked up to Obi-Wan. Master, look! Obi-Wan's eyebrows were raised up in surprise, his lips parted and jaw loose. Yellow? Kaz had a yellow lightsaber. Suddenly, his Padawan's fascination with the temple guard made a startling amount of sense. Kaz, at his core, wanted only to defend those he cared about. Obi-Wan had resolved already to pass on his Soresu to Kaz, but now that seemed all the more fitting. Kaz, the beacon of hope for his brothers, their last line of defense against a galaxy that would chew them up and spit them out. Of course, he would have a golden blade. That's remarkable, Obi-Wan breathed. He noticed the hilt and felt himself chuckling in disbelief. It was modeled after a Beskad hilt, leatherous, wrapped and solid. Completely remarkable. Kaz smiled, delight making his eyes dance and cheeks flush with triumph. It's wizard. When Cody sees this, he's gonna freak, he smirked, a flash of deviousness making its way onto his face. Rex will be so mad. He was teasing Cody, saying it was gonna be blue. This caused Obi-Wan to laugh outright. Of course he was. He regained his composure, pulling his own blade from his belt. Kaz seemed to realize something important was about to happen and schooled his own expression, taking a short step back just as Obi-Wan ignited his own cornflower blue blade. The Jedi Master extended his arm, pointing his blade out and away, tipped towards the floor. Kaz mirrored it, the tip of his own saber millimeters from Obi-Wan's. He looked up at his master, a soldier's seriousness on his young face. "Welcome to the Jedi Order, Padawan Kaz," Obi-Wan intoned solemnly. He smiled, pressing his joy and pride in Kaz down their bond. "We will have to spar once we get back to the ship." "Yes," Kaz eagerly agreed. Obi-Wan deactivated his blade and holstered it, Kaz copying his actions a beat behind. They grinned happily at each other, reveling in their success. Kaz felt like he was on top of the world in that moment, like not a single thing could touch him, his master's pride rolling through him. He might have had a shaky start, but Kaz knew he would make something of himself yet. And so did Obi-Wan.